We have some general improvements and some balance, more balance.
Hold it. Run that back.
General improvements and some balance, more balance.
And section A6.
General improvements and some balance.
Its name is the Frigate, and it is a brand new type of ship that is being added in Stellaris, yes, and it is basically sitting in between the Corvette and the Destroyer.
One of the things here in the ship section is that we do have an advanced, the Frigate. It's an advanced variant of the Corvette that specializes in torpedo delivery. They may be slower and more vulnerable, but can be devastating against large targets.
It is a torpedo boat, and it shoots missiles. It only has one G-slot, and basically, you need torpedoes in order to get it. Yes, this was all unveiled during a live stream the other day. We've talked a little bit about this in the past, but here it finally is. To be fair, though, the ship designs within Stellaris so far, Corvettes, basically, we do have the missile boat variety, but this is going to change. An additional type of ship is going to be added into the mix, so we're just going to go and fake design a frigate right now. There you go. So, the frigates. What does it do and how does it work? Well, first of all, it is a missile boat, as we've already discussed, and it will be able to put missiles on there, as well as probably a smaller gun as well. It is relatively small. It is fairly chunky in terms of its hull points and armor. It sits in right between the Destroyer and the aforementioned basic class of ship, the Corvette, but it does not necessarily have all that much evasion. The average Corvette will have 90% evasion at the end of the game, whereas right now the frigate will be sitting in at around 40. It will also be significantly slower, but its biggest bonus, however, is that it will add the ability of doing insane amounts of damage to battleships. So this is essentially what you can expect from this new type of ship. And this is not the end of it, though. No, we have a whole range of changes that are coming into ships in general. Essentially, there is going to be a new little icon at the bottom of the screen over here that says whether or not you want to add a ship role to your ship. And essentially, you will have the ability to say, hey, I want a brawler design. I want a artillery design. I want a carrier design, and that will automatically start to populate your type of systems that you have. So that right there is pretty cool. Very interesting for fast building of your ship designs. And this is, of course, all based around combat computers. Now, combat computers are also changing a little bit with these new bonuses, but the real thing here is that a lot of these weapons, especially like things like the torpedo or the disruptors, etc., they're actually going to have an engagement range, which is also new as well. Which basically means is that, well, let's put it this way, they will have a minimum and a maximum range, which means that if you can get ships underneath the neutron torpedoes of a battleship, they will no longer be able to engage whatever is attacking them. Which basically means that these types of ships, if they can get underneath the engagement range of a battleship, that battleship is essentially toast. So this is our classic spinal bow artillery core battleship. Adding the range modifier here basically means that if it's caught off guard, it is going to be toast. Look at that chunky tummy. That's very, very nice. But yeah, there is going to be some interesting stuff going on there. Missiles, they have left the G slots as they will only be for torpedoes, and instead we're going to have the G slot being used for things like just missiles and stuff. No, actually the S and the LM slots are for missiles. My apologies. So no longer will you need to put missiles on this, which is rather cool, and it's very, very strong in that regard. I'm really looking forward to this minimal engagement range as well. Also, a new type of weapon was kind of teased, which is the nanite autocannon. So for those of you who don't know, if we go in here, we've got the autocannon right here, and basically what it does is it uses nanites, which is a rare resource you can find in space, to fire upon the enemy at mass. Stormfire autocannons in this particular case are very much designed for point-blank range warfare, which I think is very, very interesting as well. But yeah, combat computers are very now much based on weapons, such as carriers. They'll stay at long range. Hopefully it actually works this time around, because previously they kind of said the same thing, but it didn't really happen, which is a little bit annoying. There's going to be a new A slot here on our ship, which is for components. And essentially what we can get here is the ability to harden our armor. So make our armor 25% more useful, or for shielding as well, which I think is very, very useful. It also counters things like penetration. So if we have, for instance, hardening armor on, say, shields, well, then they will no longer penetrate as much, which is rather useful. Hulls will now give less armor. Armor itself gives more in the normal game, and shields will be similar. Right now in the game, armor doesn't really have all that much use because it doesn't regen, so you kind of just want to slap on a hull instead. And shields, well, they regen, which makes them just a lot better in general. But yeah, a lot of changes coming in, and the biggest one, I think, and the most interesting one, has to do with cruisers. Yes, cruisers. Cruisers are going to be far more viable within the Stellaris space meta. For those of you who remember the 2.0, 2.2 era, the cruiser was the Swiss Army knife of your fleets. It was probably the best type of ship that you can build, and it does look like we're going to go back into that era, where the cruiser is by far the most flexible type of ship in the game that can do basically anything. They'll have different mid slots with torpedoes being shot, as well as missiles, short range stuff, flak everywhere. Basically a souped up destroyer, which is now a lot better as well. But we'll be able to engage pretty much anything below it, but also be able to compete with anything above it. And once again, if it manages to get underneath the engagement range of, say, a battleship, well, that battleship is going to be complete and utter toast. So that right there is pretty darn fascinating. Now to quickly touch back on that torpedo target. So, torpedoes will have multiplicative damage against larger ships up to 8 times. So this means that a devastated torpedo on one of the frigates will do 800% damage, which in this particular case would kind of come out between about 300-400 damage per hit. Just to put that into perspective, a battleship has about 7,000, 8,000 armor and shields, etc., which means that a small fleet of these relatively cheap frigate class ships can take out a battleship relatively quickly, and they'll be able to fire upon the enemy super well, which I think is very, very cool. And once again, if you manage to catch off guard a battleship, then it's basically toast. But where leaves the battleship in this? Where is the use case for battleships if they're no longer going to be able to engage at range? Well, first of all, there is Alpha Strike. Alpha Strike is really important. You'll be able to engage the enemy very effectively at long range, where you can essentially shoot a couple of times before the enemy gets to you. And that's very useful because there is a new little modifier being added, which has to do with the joys of, and I quickly need to go in here, the hit and run mechanics, and specifically combat disengagement chance. So basically what happened before is, if you had a ship and you had combat disengagement enabled, basically what would happen is that a ship would roll the dice every single time it got hit and see whether or not it would combat disengage. This is now changed. This has been removed and has been replaced with a new combat disengagement roll system, where there is multiple chances per attack that a ship can disengage, which basically means that battleships can disengage relatively easily if they need to. And essentially having that ability allows for battleships to have a little bit more survivability on the field, even though they'll basically disengage themselves. They'll jump away back to wherever their nearest holding pen is and take themselves off the field. This basically means that battleships will be far more useful as a heavy artillery platform for stationary targets or juggernauts in that particular case, which I think is really, really interesting, and it allows for a more interesting role definition for battleships, because right now in the meta, all you have to do is bring 1,000,000 frigates with missiles on top, as well as battleships that can just hit like a truck from 1,000,000 miles away, and that is basically it. And with these new meta changes, having the frigate, having the destroyer, having the cruiser means that we will have far more effectiveness on the field and a lot more variety as well. The destroyer, for instance, can slap down these frigates like crazy, whereas then cruisers can slap down the destroyers as like crazy, as well as the corvettes. Flexibility is the name of the game with the new ship meta. I'm looking forward to see how it is going to go. There were a lot more things being talked about in this particular video that went on to Twitch the other day, such as a new politics tradition. Yes, a new tradition is coming to Stellaris. Of course, the new Ascension perks that are going to be part of the Orion patch. The ability to crack pre-FTL worlds, which is apparently a pretty darn big thing, because that wasn't a thing you could do before. Shattered Ring has been changed a little bit. Apparently in Mechanist, robots will start off with some appropriate traits and a whole bunch of other things. But just to quickly loop back onto the whole politics tradition tree, essentially what it is all about is to control the galactic community. And essentially what happens is you cannot get to the last step of, say, this particular tree unless you are on the Galactic Council. So it's a little bit of a decision-making process, because it's kind of important to be on the Galactic Council to finish that tree and get that final Ascension perk. But we'll go into a little bit more depth about that in an upcoming video, and I'm looking forward to talk about that. So what do you think? Are battleships dead? Do you like this new frigate idea? Do you like the changes that are coming? Are cruisers back? Well, we shall see. Looking forward to see your comments below regarding the new meta changes. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to my patrons for making this video possible. And until next time, take good care of yourselves and stay cubic.